All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and the features of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, we are going to be examining the new feats in Tal'Dorei. Reborn. Quick reminder, if you're enjoying this stuff, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon. Turn notifications on. All those things are super, super important for videos like this getting out there. So, what is a feat? Feats are interesting in 5th edition, and they're actually a massive change to how feats have worked in D&D just in general. If we go back to 3rd edition, when feats were introduced, they were these little piecemeal ways that you could use to kind of shape how your character worked. Though, to be perfectly honest, your prestige classes were your prestige class was going to make a much more significant difference. Your feats were really just things that kind of helped you round out your character. And some prestige classes actually required you to have certain feats, but they were small, they were piecemeal, and a lot of them stacked on top of each other. Things like 2-weapon fighting, improved 2-weapon fighting, and ambidexterity were all three kind of they could almost be treated as a packaged feat, because if you were going to be a 2-weapon fighting anything, you always took those 3 feats. There really wasn't a situation when you would ever not take those 3 feats if you were 2-weapon fighting, because they were really required to be able to hit with your offhanded attacks, and to hit with your main-handed attacks too, due to dual wielding penalties. Moving on to 4th edition. 4th edition, the feats were still effectively piecemeal, but there were less feats that kind of stacked on top of each other. Feats more often would stack on top of the abilities or the powers that you chose for the character and your race and things like that. Like the prereqs for feats and things like that would generally have to do with the things that you chose from your class or your race or your paragon path, or so something like that, instead of kind of stacking on top of each other. But they were still very much piecemeal. They weren't going to be massive changes, but a few of them would do things like sword mages got a feat where specifically Eladrin sword mages got a feat where when they used their face step racial ability, they could make a melee basic attack for free whenever they did that. So things like that. They didn't massively change how you played the character, but they still were a little bit more impactful than the 3rd edition feats. When you get to 5th edition, feats are completely different. They wanted feats to mean something. So now you get significantly less feats. In 3rd edition, you got at least a dozen feats. You generally got a feat every other level or every 3 levels. You could go up to 20. In 4th edition, you got even more than that, because you go up to level 30, and a lot of times, I think you still got most of the time you still got a feat every other level, but you had an additional 10 levels that you got to deal with the feats for. 5th edition, you only ever get a feat every 4 levels. Roughly, it's not exactly that, but for the most part, it's every 4 levels, unless you're a fighter, and then you get extras, because that's part of being a fighter. And you actually have a choice. You have a choice between getting an ability score improvement, so like getting a higher dex or a higher strength, or you can choose a feat. So because they're not something that you just get on top of your level up and everything like that, they actually are something that you can play the entire game without taking just a single feat. They are technically an optional rule. They need to be more impactful. And the actual design philosophy behind 5th edition, they actually talked about feats when people were asking them about, what's 5th edition about and things. One of the things they said, feats are meant to be massive changes to your character. Taking a single feat should change how you play your character. And when you look at the feats in the player's handbook, and then when you look at Xanathar's and Tasha's feats, they are pretty significant, massive changes. So that's what we're going to be looking at when we look at the feats in Tal'Dorei Reborn. Is they should be impactful, they should feel powerful, and the most important thing, taking a feat should change how your character plays in some way, shape, or form. So, that being said, let's dive into these feats and see exactly what they can do. So, the first feat is Cruel. This is a super cool feat. Effectively, you get a number of cruelty dice equal to your proficiency bonus. So if you take this, the first time you can get a feat for most characters is level 4. Unless you're a variant human, your first feat is going to be at level 4. So at level 4, your proficiency bonus is 2. As soon as you hit level 5, it turns into 3. So I mean at level 4, you get 2 cruelty dice and they're d6s. And they put some specific limitations on it as well. You can only roll 1 cruelty dice per turn. So, again, they say per turn, not per round. And a cruelty dice spend whenever you roll it. And then the specific things you can use your cruelty dice for. When you deal damage to a creature, you can spend 1 cruelty die to deal extra damage to the creature equal to the roll. When you score a critical hit, you can spend 1 cruelty die to gain temporary hit points equal to the roll. And then when you make a charisma intimidation check, you can spend 1 cruelty die and add the roll to your check. And you get all spent cruelty dice when you finish a long rest. So, first things first, I like dice pools. I think they're a really, really fun mechanic because, first of all, and this is something you just kind of have to come to terms with the longer you play RPGs, you will become a dice goblin. That's just how it works. Everyone that plays RPGs, you eventually get, like, here, I will show you. I have, like, this is, let's start with this. This is the bag that I used to take with me when I ran games at conventions. This is my convention dice bag. I think I have 6 complete dice sets in here, and I think an additional 6 or 7 D6s in here. This is my dice bag. That being said, after we moved to this new place, I bought these. This is a complete metal dice set. They're really pretty. They're green and gold because the Green Ranger is the most awesome thing ever, and I am far too interested in a children's television show. You just get more dice. So one of the reasons I like dice pools is it gives you a reason to own more dice, which we don't need reasons to own more dice, but come on, you want to. You totally want to. So that's one thing. The other thing is you have something physical that shows that you can actually use to do something. And I think that is a really, really fun thing to have. Again, I played a monk for years, and monks get as many key points as they have levels. My monk currently is level 17, so I had tons of key points. But whenever I'd burn a key point, it was just I would color in a circle on my character sheet. Wasn't that fun? But having physical things in front of you, you can just glance down at your dice pool and go, oh look, I've got 5, or oh look, I've got 3. And that tells you something. Then being able to pick them up and roll them, and that roll turning into something, it's just a fun mechanic. I think more classes should use dice rolls, or subclasses should use dice pools for their limited resource. They're just fun. That being said, this is a little bit limited, but you effectively have 2 different uses for cruel, and they make sense with the idea of this feat. This feat is you are a particularly cruel person, and because of that, you're better at inflicting more damage on people, and you actually get a little bit back from doing bad things to people, to hurting people. You actually it gives you a little bit of something, and then tying it to charisma intimidation just makes sense. So everything here kind of makes sense. The thing that I want to kind of bring to the forefront and highlight is the wording on the first ability. At the end it says, You spend one cruelty die to deal extra damage to the creature equal to the roll. That is a very large distinction that a lot of people miss. There's a difference to roll an additional die or add an additional die to your damage and roll a die and add a number equal to the number rolled to your damage. Because that changes it from an additional die of damage to a flat modifier to your damage. Despite the fact that you still roll a die, there is a huge difference, and the difference comes in critical hits. In 5th edition, the way a critical hit works is you double the number of dice that you would roll for the damage. So if you're using a greatsword, greatsword normally does 2d6 damage. If you get a crit with it, it does 4d6 to the damage. Now, if you are a paladin and you add on a divine smite would normally add an additional 2d8. But if you crit and then add divine smite, because you are adding an additional number of dice to it, you double the number of dice. It's one of the reasons why paladins are really, really dangerous when they crit. Because generally what happens is a paladin will crit and they will always add a smite onto a crit because it's just extra damage and it does a lot of damage. It's one of the reasons rogues can get really, really bad, because all the additional damage they do with sneak attack is additional dice. This, however, does not work that way. What this turns into is you roll a die and then add the number rolled. So if you crit and you used cruelty, you would not be able to double the damage of your cruelty to the die. Now, they do kind of give you something that you can do with critical hits with cruelty, which is if you get a critical hit, you can spend a cruelty die to gain temporary hit points equal to the roll. Temporary hit points, always useful. However, cruelty is already limited by the fact that you have a limited number of cruelty to the dice. And you can only ever roll one per turn. So if you get multiple attacks, you can only add a cruelty die to one of those attacks. And a d6 of temporary hit points really isn't that much. I would actually prefer to see cruel change to when you deal damage, you can spend one cruelty die and add that die to the roll, so it would double when you get a crit, and then get rid of the when you score a critical hit, and just turn that into when you deal damage, you can spend a cruelty die to gain temporary hit points. And if it's a critical hit, I would say double the temporary hit points you would get. Just because those two things, like I said, I like this feat. I think it's just a little bit too limited, because you're already limited to you can only spend one cruelty die per turn. So theoretically, when it's not your turn, if you get an opportunity attack, you can burn another cruelty die, just like you could with a rogue sneak attack. But I think it's just a little bit too limited, because a d6 of damage, even at level 4, an additional d6 of damage once per turn that you only get to use 3 times per long rest is not a huge thing. Now, the charisma intimidation thing, adding a number to a roll versus adding a number to damage are two incredibly different things. The highest DC you can get in 5th edition is a DC 30. Hit points for a challenge rating 2 creature are in the 50s to 70s. So hit points, anytime you're adding additional damage, it's always going to be less impactful than if you're adding a number to a roll against a difficulty class or against armor class or something like that. So the charisma intimidation makes perfect sense. I think it works really well. I think the other two abilities are just slightly underpowered. So turning the first one into you just add an additional die of damage to the attack, so it can you can double when you crit, and getting rid of when you score a critical hit for the temporary hit points actually gives you a choice. Do you want to kind of relish in the pain that you're suffering, or do you want to inflict more pain? Right now, you really don't have a choice when you want to spend your cruelty dice, other than, do I want to spend it now or don't? With the changes that I recommend, this actually gives you a choice. Do I need to be more defensive? Do I want to be more offensive? And it also means, because both of these happens after a hit, you already know if you crit before you have to choose your that you're going to add your cruelty. So it also is something that you get to go, okay, I know I scored a crit, very similar to like how a paladin is. I want to add a cruelty effect to it. Do I want something that's going to give me a little bit more health, which 2d6, even once you start getting into tier 3, 2d6 temporary hit points is actually useful. 1d6 temporary hit points is arguable whether or not. I mean, that's going to cushion half a blow. 2d6 has a much better chance of maybe negating a single attack. So yeah. Overall, I like Cruel. I just think it needs to be a little bit more powerful, and maybe level up a little bit when you get into tier 3, like maybe turning the d6s into d8s once you hit level 11 or level 14, whichever one you like better. Just so that it still feels powerful. But it's a cool ability nonetheless. So, moving on. The next feat is called Flash Recall. As a bonus action, you prepare a spell of first level or higher from your spellbook, if you're a wizard, or from your class spell list, if you're not a wizard. This spell must be of a level of which you have spell slots, and it replaces another spell of equal or higher level that you had previously prepared. Once you use this feat to recall a spell, you can't do so again until you complete a short or long rest. So this is one of those feats that, if you don't really understand how the magic system works, you're going to think that this is a kind of a useless feat. First things first, they do mention prepared spells. There's kind of two different ways that you can deal with magic. You have things like sorcerers, or sorcerers and bards, where they just know their spells. They memorize their spells, and they always have those spells available to them, but they memorize a limited number of spells. Whereas wizards, they have a spell book with more spells than they have access to in a day, so they prepare a small number of them. The same is true about clerics, druids, and even I believe artificers all prepare spells. They don't have them memorized. Because of that, this particular feat doesn't work for sorcerers or bards, because they don't prepare spells, they have them memorized. So, that being said, there are a lot of situations where you generally, with all these classes, you prepare your spells in the morning. So you have to guess, okay, what spells are going to be most useful today? And I will guarantee you, other than maybe a wizard, because wizards, the utility spells that wizards get are not quite as extensive as bards and clerics, where some of their utility spells have very, very specific situations where they're useful. But it can happen for wizards too, especially if you're something like an abjuration wizard or an illusionist wizard. There could be situations where you're like, well, I have that spell, but I didn't prepare it today. And for clerics and druids, it happens all the time. It's like, well, yeah, I wish I had that spell, but I don't. So this effectively allows you to switch a spell that you have prepared with another spell once per day. And in certain situations, that can be extremely useful. It also means certain spells, like a really good example is Tiny Hut. Tiny Hut is an extremely useful spell. It effectively allows you to get a long rest in in a place you normally wouldn't, because it protects you from just about everything. So Tiny Hut is an incredibly useful spell, but it means at the beginning of the morning you have to have it prepared, and there's really only going to be one time you're ever going to want to use Lumen's Tiny Hut, which is at the end of the day when you're getting ready to sleep. So having to waste one of your prepared spells on this spell that you literally are not going to use until it's time to sleep isn't always the greatest idea, especially if you're trying to be prepared for a lot of different situations. So with something like Flash Recall, you can use it in the middle of combat when you realize, oh shoot, I prepared all my fire spells and we're facing a red dragon. None of that's working. I'm going to switch one of them and give me a really powerful cold-based spell or a really powerful thunder-based spell. Really anything that's not fire. That could be really useful. Or maybe you're a cleric and you didn't have Revivify on you because you weren't expecting your friends to die today. But due to a bad roll or something like that, they fell off a cliff or something and they did die, and you need that Revivify right now. Revivify has to be cast within a minute of the person dying. Otherwise, you can't use it. So Flash Recall can be that clutch thing. However, when you get to the end of the day, that also means all of those end of the day really useful spells that you just didn't want didn't need access to until that point can be prepared with a bonus action. And because you're going to be going to bed shortly before that, it means that you can gain access to many, many more utility spells that a lot of players tend to just never use because, well, yeah, there's certain situations where this might be extremely useful, but those situations are so limited, I'm not going to waste one of my prepared spells on the idea that this really, really unique situation just happens to happen. So yeah, from a quick glance, you might think Flash Recall is not something that's really big, or like we said, does it massively change how you play your character, which is what a feat is supposed to do. When you really start considering what this means, basically any time during the day, you can get access to any spell you want by just unpreparing another one. It extremely opens up the options for your spellcasters, and it does mean that there's going to be situations where you wouldn't have been very useful, and now, oh, I'm very useful because I can just Flash Recall this spell and do something that we didn't think we were going to need, but now we do. So yeah, I like it. I think it's a cool thing. Moving on. The next feat is Mystic Conflux. You gain the following benefits. You can attune up to 4 magic items at once, and you can cast the Identify spell without expending a spell slot or material components. You must finish a long rest before you can do so again. So another thing that if you're not super familiar with 5th edition, or just if it's never could come up, is magic items are significantly more rare in 5th edition than they were in previous editions. In 4th edition, magic items, you found magic items like candy. They were just everywhere, to the point where making, if you built a character that was not level 1, part of the character building rules were, if you built like a level 3 or level 4 character, you were supposed to give them 3 magic items. 1 magic item that was the same level as the character you're building, 1 magic item that was a lower level than the character you're building, 1 level lower, and 1 magic item that was 1 level higher than the character you were building. And all magic items actually had a level that tied to player levels as well. 3rd edition, magic items weren't quite as common as they were in 4th edition, but they were still just tons of them. You were always getting magic items. 5th edition, they're designed to be significantly more rare, and one of the ways that they kind of control magic item overlap, which was a problem in earlier editions, is you would have you have a limited number of items that you can attune to. Some magic items, not all, some magic items require you to attune to them. and normal characters can only attune to 3. The only ones that are different are artificers, who eventually can attune up to 5 different magic items. But that is a limiting factor. It's one of the unique things about artificers is they have many more attunement slots, so they can actually create combinations that you normally wouldn't be able to create by having a lot of different magic items. Mystic Conflux is designed to allow you to change that a little bit by giving you one additional attunement, and that can be a really big deal. There are a lot of really useful magic items that sometimes you just won't use them because, well, I have a limited number of things that I can attune to, and I need other things. Like I need a really powerful magic weapon, and a lot of the good ones are going to require attunement. Your kind of standard +1 longsword is not going to require attunement, but the more powerful ones do. Other things like a bunch of really useful kind of utility items also require attunement. So this allows you to attune to more items, which is really, really useful. It means that your character is probably going to be searching for items a little bit more often, and getting access to the Identify spell once a day also means you're going to be that little bit more kind of Indiana Jones style character where you're always looking for new magic items and things like that. And you have access to Identify. It's only once per day, but it still means you find a magic item, you're like, ooh, wonder if that's cursed. Identify. Oh, look, it's cursed and it would suck my soul out. Maybe I don't want to attune to that, but if we remove curse from it, this is a pretty wicked looking sword, and I think it'd be fun to use. So yeah, it's another thing that when you first look at it, wow, just an additional magic item. No, because that's going to change how you play your character, because unlike everyone else, you don't have to be quite as limited when you're picking up magic items. You can be a little bit more greedy and have a little bit more fun with that. Now, the other thing I find interesting about this is feats in general. The rules for feats in 5th edition is you cannot take a feat multiple times unless it specifically says you can take this feat multiple times, and it will normally give you limitations on how you can take it multiple times. For this one, it doesn't say you can attune to an additional magic item. It specifically says you can attune to up to 4 magic items at once. So even if someone were to try and take this multiple times, which you can't according to that, but again, not everybody knows that rule. This specifically says, no, you can attune up to 4 magic items, not you could attune additional. It also means for artificers, this is not going to be a remarkably useful of a feat once you get high enough that you start getting your additional attunements, because this would actually give you less attunements than you get just from being an artificer. So understanding that limitation is an essential part of using this feat correctly. So yeah, overall, again, it's something that's going to change the way you play your character. It's actually changing how D&D itself works, which is what D&D 5th edition, which is what feats are supposed to do. It should make things a lot different. And I think it does that really well. And I think there's a lot of fun you could have with this feat. Moving on. The next feat is Remarkable Recovery. This is... I've come to start calling them half feats, because what they do is you get a partial ability score improvement. You can add 1 to a certain ability score and some extras of stuff. So I call them half feats because like the other feats, you have to choose between getting an ability score improvement or taking the feat. This, you kind of get the both, but an ability score improvement is normally increase 1 thing by 2 or 2 things by 1. This is only going to increase 1 thing by 1, and it's a specific thing that you're going to increase. So that being said, you get to introduce... We're going to try this again. You get to increase your Constitution score by 1 up to a max of 20, which is how 5th edition works. When you are successfully stabilized while dying, you regain hit points equal to your Constitution modifier, minimum 1. And whenever you regain hit points as a result of a spell, potion, or class feature, but not this feat, you regain additional hit points equal to your Constitution modifier. So, what does this mean? This means healer's kits have become super useful for you. And what I mean by that is a healer's kit is actually a remarkably useful item. What it does is it allows you to effectively instantly stabilize a creature without a roll. If you get, there's a certain feat, I believe it's called Healer, that allows you to use healing kit stacks to restore hit points. But normally all they do is they stabilize a creature. Well, for this, anytime you get stabilized, you regain hit points. So in combat, as soon as you hit 0, you have to start rolling death saves. Fail 3 death saves, your character dies. Absolutely dead. Roll a new character unless they can resurrect you somehow. If you make 3 saving throws, you stabilize. You're at 0 hit points, but you're no longer bleeding out or anything. But you're also unconscious. You don't get to come back into combat. You're just not in danger of dying anymore. Generally, the easiest way to deal with unconscious allies who are at 0 hit points is heal them. Even 1 hit point will bring you back to consciousness. This gets rid of that. All they need to be is stabilized. There's a cantrip called Spare the Dying, which allows you to just instantly stabilize someone. If they have remarkable recovery, they don't just stabilize, they become conscious. And something else that a lot of people don't remember a lot is death saves happen at the beginning of your turn, not the end. So normally if you roll a nat 20 on a death save, not only are you instantly stabilized, you regain 1 hit point. Because you do that at the beginning of your turn, you get your entire turn once you do that. With Remarkable Recovery, you no longer need a nat 20 to be able to wake up. Once you make your 3rd saving throw, you get up. And because it happens at the beginning of your turn, you get your full turn. It's really, really nice. And again, it interacts with so many other things. You can make a medicine check in combat as an action to stabilize someone. So anybody that has the Remarkable Recovery feat, that means if your healer is not able to get to you in time to save you or anything like that, all you need is someone with a decent medicine score. It doesn't have to be great. You're looking at a DC 10 to stabilize in general. So you just need someone to make a DC 10 medicine check, and as long as they can do that, you're back in combat. It's going to require their action, but depending on exactly what you do, that sacrificing an action to bring one of your allies back into combat is useful. The other thing that's nice is you get additional hit points when you get healed for everything but those hit points that you get when you stabilize. That's what that last line is about. It's like, no, you don't get double the amount of hit points. You only get your Constitution modifier. But that's another thing. I mentioned before on here that healing in 5th edition has diminishing returns really, really bad. When you get to higher levels, a lot of times the best use of your healing is to heal people that are at 0 hit points, because bringing them back from unconsciousness is significantly more useful than giving them 6 hit points, which are going to be drained by the next attack they hit, and they will still probably go unconscious, because 6 hit points isn't really that much. When you get to high level healing spells, they tend to be a little bit more useful, but healing is a little bit underpowered in 5th edition, or at least healing conscious allies. Healing unconscious allies is super useful. So with this, giving a little bit of a boost to healing is really nice, and this can be exceptionally useful for characters that take a lot of damage, or since we talked about the blood mage, having a Remarkable Recovery be one of the feats you take as a blood magic wizard. Those two synergize really, really well, because you're going to be taking damage, but you're going to be getting healed fairly often by the rest of your team, hopefully, and that just makes your abilities that much easier to use. And it also means if you are rendered unconscious, you can come back pretty easy. So overall, I like Remarkable Recovery. Again, it'll definitely change how you play your character because you're not nearly as scared about death, and it will change how the rest of your party plays their characters as well. Feats that affect your whole party are even more fun. So yeah, love that. Moving on. The next feat is Spell Driver. When you use your bonus action to cast a spell of first level or higher, you can also use your action to cast another spell of first level or higher. However, if you cast 2 more spells in a single turn, only one of them can be third level or higher. So this, I mentioned this before we were talking about sorcerers. One of the big balancing factors specifically designed for sorcerers is the idea that if you use your bonus action to cast a leveled spell, you cannot cast any other leveled spell. What I mean by leveled spell is first level or higher. Cantrips aren't affected by this, but using your bonus action to cast a leveled spell means you can't cast any other ones. With Spell Driver, you actually can, but there's some slight limitations. And those limitations are only one of them can be third level or higher. And the reason that is third level spells are the major tipping point of power in spellcasting. First and second level spells are nice, third level spells are game changing. That's why you get them when you enter tier 2. You spellcasters, full casters, get access to third level spells at level 5, which is the beginning of tier 2. That is a whole new realm of content, and being able to cast multiple third level spells breaks the game really well. The reason I know this, and the reason Matt knows this, is when they first started streaming Critical Role, they had a sorcerer on their team, and they actually changed from Pathfinder First Edition because Second Edition didn't exist way back then. Their campaign was in Pathfinder, and they switched it to D&D 5th Edition when they started streaming. Well, the sorcerer in Pathfinder is very, very different than the sorcerer in 5th Edition, and so they had to make some modifications and changes so that the characters still felt the same. And in the first few episodes, the sorcerer was quick casting like multiple fireballs and things like that, and it broke the game. It didn't work. It was really, really powerful, and it made everyone else feel underpowered, which is the sheer amount of damage that could happen. So Matt came up with this house rule where, he didn't want to completely take away the quick casting because that was something that the character could do in not third edition, in Pathfinder, and it felt like it would change the character too much. But he made the limitation of the second spell has to be second level or lower, because spells are just too different in 5th edition than they were in 3rd edition, which effectively what Pathfinder is D&D 3rd edition. Like, it uses the same rules. There's just some slight modifications for ease of use and some other changes. So that's where this comes from. That being said, it's a cool ability. And again, the reason this feat came into being was because of a sorcerer. And a lot of people are going to think of it because sorcerers bonus cast spells more often than any other class in people's minds. However, there's another extremely useful version of this, and that is for bards, druids, and clerics. And this goes back to 4th edition with how leaders were able to heal. In 4th edition, instead of having a move, an action, and a bonus action like you do in 5th edition, you had a move action, you had a standard action, and you had a minor action. Minor actions and bonus actions were effectively are very, very similar. The big difference being you could actually trade your standard action for a move action, you could trade your standard action for a minor action, whereas bonus actions are just bonus actions. You can't trade them for anything. But leaders, every single leader had a minor action ability that allowed them to heal. And it made playing the healer a hell of a lot more fun. Because you would use your minor action to heal, but you would use your standard action to do awesome shit. And sometimes that awesome shit included healing. So a lot of times it didn't. Playing a cleric in 4th edition was massively badass. Because they would go, oh, here is your healing word as my minor action. And oh, I think I'm going to call down a pillar of fire on the same turn. 4th edition is just over the top in everything. It is a massively fun system to play. Anyone that tells you 4th edition was bad doesn't understand the system. But everything is just dialed to 11. With Spell Driver, you can bring that back. Bonus action, a healing word at level 1 or 2. So you can just give out some free healing. And then as your standard action, call down a pillar of fire. Bring out a guiding bolt. Call down lightning. Anything that you want. That is where I see Spell Driver being the most fun. Is playing a healer and taking Spell Driver means you can heal. And that's another reason why healing is kind of underpowered in 5th edition, is because a lot of times if you heal, you have to choose between healing someone or doing something really useful with your character. And so 9 times out of 10, it's always going to be a better idea to cast a 6th or 7th level smiting type spell than it is to heal. Even if you cast Cure Wounds at 5th level and you're healing 5 d8 plus your wisdom modifier, it's still not going to be as useful as doing something really, really powerful and doing that much dice worth of damage, but to a whole group of people. So Spell Driver allows you to play that kind of 4th edition healer where, yes, I will use my bonus action to do this, and then I'll use my main action to do something super cool. Spell Driver could turn healing into a viable option because you can now multiple heal. Or you can combine it with other things. Activate Spiritual Weapon and then, also cast Armor of Faith or something. Get all your buff spells at one time. There's a lot of different things you can do as a Spell Driver that would allow you to just do some really interesting, fun things. So, yeah, and again, massively change how you play your character. We like that. We think it's cool. Moving on. There's only 2 more left, and this video has not become ungodly long. And I have cool stuff planned for next week. So let's just finish these last 2 feats. So, the next feat is Thrown Arms Master. First things first, if you are unaware, I really like thrown weapons. I built a character. Once Tasha's came out and they had a thrown weapon fighting style, I built a character that threw cards as weapons. I love that idea. I think it's super fun, super cool. So yeah, already just reading the title of this, I'm like, ooh. The other thing about this is a half feat. So this one, you can increase your strength and dexterity score, strength or dexterity score by 1 up to a maximum of 20. So this you can, if you have an odd strength or an odd dexterity, you can use this to get up to the next ability score improvement rank. Your ability score modifier goes up by 1. And then you get the other things. Simple and martial melee weapons without the thrown property have the thrown property for you. One-handed weapons have a normal range of 20 feet and a long range of 60, while two-handed weapons have a normal range of 15 and a long range of 30. We'll come back to that. Weapons that already have the thrown property increase their short range by 20 and their long range by 40. Again, very useful. Then when you miss with a thrown weapon attack, using a light weapon, the weapon returns to your grasp like a boomerang at the end of your turn. Unless something prevents it from returning, you can catch and stow as many weapons as you threw in this way. You can throw boomerangs! I love this. I think it's super, super cool. So the first things first, everything is thrown. That is a huge change. And oh boy, can that be fun. I'm specifically visualizing, because I just finished watching the season finale of Legend of Vox Machina. And I'm specifically imagining Grog taking his massive blood axe, great axe, and just going and having it plant itself, which may or may not happen in this show. No spoilers, but it's a cool thing to be able to throw anything and turn anything into a thrown weapon. It adds so much and allows you to do so many cool things. One of the things that I used to really enjoy, again, I'm going to bring up 4th edition, was there was actually a sword, a specific magic item you could get. I think it was called like a returning blade or something similar to that. That required you to be a sword mage in order to use it. But what it did is it allowed you to throw your sword. Sword mages in general used long swords, but you could use any effectively one-handed sword. Sword mages were, in order to get all the benefits, you actually had to use a one-handed weapon and have the other hand open to get all the benefits of being a sword mage. So these specific weapons, you could throw it, and sword mages normally have this ability where, as a minor action, they can just call their weapon back to their hand. So using this magic weapon, you could do it, I think you could just do it more often. So you could turn into effectively a ranged sword mage, which is really cool. And I like that idea. Kind of, if you watched the Castlevania Netflix series, kind of the way that Alucard fights, where his sword is just like constantly going and fighting, and then he's fighting as well. I think that's a really interesting thing. Now, that was done to mimic the sword familiar from Symphony of the Night, so take that with a grain of salt. And that's not exactly how this would work, but this still kind of gives you a way to kind of throw your sword. And then something I used to do as my monk is I used sai, which were just daggers that I renamed. In one of the first battles that I got into, we were fighting an Utyug. And so I was 20 feet away, and I had my dagger, which was my sai. And so I said, okay, I pick it up, and I twirl it, and I throw it, and it hits the Utyug. And then I just turned to the person, because I was a level 5 monk. He started as a level 5 monk. So I already had Shadow Step. And so I just turned to the person next to me, or maybe it was 6. I had Shadow Step, that's all I know. Turned to next to me and said, I've got to go retrieve my sai. And then I Shadow Stepped over, picked it up, and stabbed him again. Because it was just cool. And Throne Arm Master lets you do that with anything. You could just, you could be Grog and go, raw! I've got to go get my axe. And just do really, really fun things. Increasing the throne property is another thing that's just really, really useful. Getting additional range on thrown weapons is really, really useful. And then the miss with the thrown weapon, I just like the idea of throwing a dagger and it misses and you just go ching. So if you roll like me and you just keep missing, you're not just running out of daggers. You get to go. Now, specifically about this, it does say a light weapon. So it would be limited to things like short swords, scimitars, all of those things would work. Long swords, great axes, things like that would not work. But anything that has the light property, you could use that on and come up with some pretty cool things. Especially if maybe you have like a short sword Frostbrand or something like that. You could now throw it, and if you accidentally miss, you got it back. Or if it gets stuck in them, you go, I've got to go get my sword and pull it out and do... Sorry, I just love throwing weapons. So again, as a half feat, this has a lot to it and will definitely change how you play your character. So I really love it. I think it's super cool. Moving on. The final feat. Vital Sacrifice. As a bonus action, you can choose to take 1d6 necrotic damage to gain a blood boon. Your blood boon... this is hard enough to say without a stutter. Your blood boon lasts for 1 hour or until it's suspended. You can expend this blood boon to gain one of the following benefits. When you make an attack roll, roll a d6 and add it to the total. When you hit with an attack spell, you deal an additional 2d6 necrotic damage. Or when you cause a creature to make a strength, dexterity, or constitution saving throw, roll a d4 and reduce their save by the amount rolled. The damage you take to gain a blood boon can't be reduced in any way. So first things first, this is, dealing with the blood magic that they kind of introduced with that, which I like. I like having something that is based on something that's going to be unique to either the blood domain or the blood magic school of magic for wizards. So I like that, but this isn't just giving you a lesser version of what they have. This is a completely different thing that works along the same theoretical principles, but it's something new. So a blood wizard could take Vital Sacrifice and get benefit from it. Anyone can get a benefit from Vital Sacrifice. I think it's really interesting. When you hit with an attack or spell, you deal an additional 2d6 necrotic damage. That could be, well, we're going to expend it. Yeah, so this happens once. But effectively, it says when you hit with an attack or spell, because you deal an additional 2d6 necrotic damage, that means on a crit, that doubles. So this can be really good. It's a bonus action, so theoretically, you can just bonus action Vital Sacrifice yourself to always have one of these available. And then, adding, being able to add a d6 to attack roll is really, really useful. The one that I really, really like, again, specifically because I'm a monk player, being able to reduce con saves. The thing that people will argue about is either super, super overpowered and therefore monks are stupid, or super, super underpowered because it's the only thing monks can do and therefore monks are stupid, is Stunning Strike. Stunning Strike is a definitive feature of the monk. It's not a defining feature because they get it too late. They don't get it to level 5, but it is something unique to the monk. And it requires the enemy to make a con save. So, con saves, especially for things like giants, you're almost never going to Stunning Strike into a giant, which is fine. But being able to roll a d4 and reduce the again, a d4 is adding any numbers to a saving throw or subtracting any numbers from a saving throw is a big deal in 5th edition. The ranges are not that wide compared to like hit points where you can get into the 2, 3, 400s. So yeah, I really like it. And then strength and dexterity. Like, there are so many different times when that can be extremely useful. The only problem I have with this is there's nothing in here that limits you to how many blood boons you can have at once. And the reason why I mention that is a single healing potion costs 50 gold pieces, and it heals 2d4 plus 2 hit points. That theoretically can be up to 10 hit points. And there are certain spells and things like that make you always get the maximum amount of health. Or if you have Remarkable Recovery and Vital Sacrifice, you would get even more health from that. That means, theoretically, a blood boon costs 50 gold. Theoretically, 2 blood boons, because maximum you could roll would be 12 damage for two blood boons. And you can almost heal 12 damage from a single healing potion. So that effectively means blood boons cost 25 gold, which at low levels is pretty significant. But once you get to about mid-tier 2, it's not. It's not at all. And there are lots of different ways that you can get more healing potions or other ways to heal yourself. So with that can become something that, if you know you're going to be going to combat soon, because they only last for an hour, if you know you're going to be going into combat soon, you could just get 4 or 5 blood boons and then be extremely powerful being able to do this. And again, it would only cost you, getting 4 blood boons would probably only cost you 2 healing potions or a second level Cure Wounds. And each blood boon can be an additional 2d6 necrotic damage. Theoretically, could be an additional 4d6 necrotic damage, which is equivalent to about a second level spell slot, and that's just one. So trading a second level spell slot heal for the ability to possibly crit with these things and get a lot more damage, it's always going to be more beneficial to turn basically your second level healing spells into Vital Sacrifice and Blood boons. So the one change I would make to this is just stating you can only have one blood boon at a time. I don't think it massively limits the ability because it only takes a bonus action to do. So you theoretically can do it every single turn, but there's no way that you can bank a bunch of blood boons so that in the middle of combat, or right before a really bad combat, you can come in and just have really, really powerful stuff with no real downside because you'll be able to heal all the damage that you take well before you get into the combat. So that's the only change I would make to it is just put in there you can only have one blood boon at a time. And if you try to get another blood boon, it replaces the one that you already had. So that'd be the only change I make to it. Otherwise, again, this definitely changes how you play the character. There's a lot of different ways you can use it, especially, again, strength, dex, and constitution saves. There's a lot of them. Con saves, not quite as much, but strength and dex saves, there's tons of ways they can use it. And every single class has a subclass that will do one of those saves somewhere. So, yeah, like it's a cool ability. It's super fun. It just needs that tiny little limitation in order for it not to be abused. So, final thoughts. Overall, like I said, I love all these. This was something when I saw that there was new feats. I was a little bit worried because I've seen other homebrew feats, and a lot of times people just don't understand how feats work, and they're either really, really powerful, or they're third edition feats that are these tiny little piecemeal things that are never going to be useful. More often than not, they're overpowered. These, all of them, and they all generally tend to focus on just make you do more damage somehow. These aren't. They're really interesting. They're really fun. They all will change how you play your character, not simply by giving them more damage to do, but by allowing them to make different choices. Like I said, there's a couple that I think need some slight tweaks to just make them a little bit more useful. But overall, it's super cool. I am thoroughly impressed with these new feats, and I would allow, like I said, with the few minor changes that I made, I would allow every single one of these at my table because I just think they're cool. So anyway, that is gonna be all for me today. As always, again, like, subscribe, turn notifications on in the comments down below. Which is your favorite feat that we talked about, and what cool way would you use it? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that is all for me today, and I'll see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.